Edge. I had my mic off. Let's do it again. All right, welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
And I'm Eric.
And I'm joined by our guest, Hian. He's been a good friend of ours for, I think, about 2 years now. We've known him online in a couple different places, but we enjoy talking about games with him. He's done some of his own side projects, and we always appreciate his insight on a lot of these topics. So we're going to be talking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake today, specifically some of the old news that broke recently for us English-speaking people this week. And then that's probably going to spiral into a general Final Fantasy VII Remake discussion. And then also, we're going to be talking about another game coming out here in the West, another Eden. And that's going to be coming out on January 28th. So more details on that later, but before we get into that, Eric, what have you been playing this week?
Well, I caved and I bought Tales of Vesperia. I just wanted something to distract me until Resident Evil 2 and Kingdom Hearts 3, the end of the month. So I'm playing that, and it's just really it's just enjoyable as it was the last time. I noticed a couple of the new scenes added in, especially the ones with the new Patty character in it. It's like she doesn't really. It's kind of weird. It's just ones that are just added in. You could tell they were added in because it's just like really random scenes that happen from dungeons that you go through where she wasn't before, and then she just disappears, and then you're like, well, that was a thing, and you just go on to the next thing. But besides that, I noticed a little visual enhancements, and but besides that, it's mostly what we reviewed of it last time on the last podcast, and my thoughts haven't changed much on that. But I also did get Onimusha HD, and
how's that?
I'm enjoying it. As someone who is a fan of the series and loved it, actually got it when it first came out. I was on a real Capcom craze, so anything Devil May Cry, like I was totally up for. And I on a nostalgic level, I love the game just as much as I did before, and it even offers the option to full analog control instead of using like a pseudo tank control type of deal. So I've been enjoying it for that also. But besides that, it's mostly the same game. It's definitely the enhanced version that came out. I forgot the exact name. It was the one that came out on the Xbox. But if you're, I don't know if it's something I completely recommend if someone's into modern action games, but if you're looking for a good PS2 classic, then I think Onimusha HD still holds up well enough. It's about it's about less than 10 hours, the game, if it's your first time playing. But
how much was it?
$20.
That's not bad.
Yeah, and it's great. And I really hope more people buy it, because then Onimusha 2 will come out, and that was a fantastic game. And so was, but 3's my favorite. So I'm kind of hoping this one sells well, then 2 comes out, then 3 comes out, then maybe Dawn of Dreams also. I enjoyed that game also, but I liked 3 more. But hopefully, what's his name? Jean Reno? Hopefully they're allowed to use Jean Reno's likeliness again and make
awesome
HD release 3. But yeah, but that's what I've been playing.
Just kind of buying your time, though, until Kingdom Hearts 3 comes out then?
Yeah, get my Finny fun on.
Yeah, and have you been playing anything? Or have you played those games?
Yeah, I actually played the Onimusha games when they were first released. But I don't remember actually how old I was when I first got my hands on Onimusha 1. But I remember rage quitting at some point playing that game. I think it's when you climb like the tower at some point, and there are 2 bosses in quick succession, and one of them has like a long range attack, and you're trapped in a tiny room, but you can't like quite get close to him. And I think I'd ran out of health items, and he owned me like over and over again. So at that time I was like, screw this. I have better games to play. But I really enjoyed the game. I'll say that. I just hadn't gotten quite into that mindset of I don't know, playing a game over and over again until you figure things out.
Figure the
That wasn't
strategy
like
out.
yeah, probably. I was in my JRPG craze or in my JRPG period, and so you get used to kind of playing games focusing on the story, and if you ever get stuck, you just grind for a bit and then you move on. You just trash the boss kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
um, it's I guess it's kind of strange because I was also hugely into fighting games at the time, and I didn't have the same problem there. But I was just something that rubbed me the wrong way about that specific portion of the game, so I gave up. But I came back to the game a few years later and had a good time all the way through. So it's a game that I'm fond of.
Awesome.
I'm a lot like that too. It's like if I play like a string of RPGs and then get into an action game, like it feels a little hard to get back into it at first. I eventually get back into the swing of things, but like if I'm playing like a very tactical game and it's very slow pace, use a mouse, click, stuff like that, and when I get into like an action heavy game like Dark Souls or something like that, it's like how do I play again?
Yeah, you kind of
Yeah.
have to readjust your mind for the way the game wants to be played, because you're used to all this turn-based strategy and thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead, and then all of a sudden you get jumped into something where you have to react in the moment. It's a different style of play.
But lately, I don't have that much time to play stuff. Like my work is drowning me. For the most part, I had crunch time. I worked 10 to 11 hours every day throughout all of December. So and not a whole lot of time. So when I game, I end up dabbling with like silly mobile titles. Right now, I'm playing a game called Rangers of Oblivion, which is a bastardized copycat of Tolkien and Monster Hunter, kind of smashed into one.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it's pretty, and it has like an open world MMO kind of facet to it as well. But it's actually really polished. So I don't know. It's kind of like I started playing it ironically. Like this is so dumb on so many levels conceptually that you just can't help but laugh while you're playing it. But at some point, it was this is actually kind of fun. And so I have Josh and Matt from over at Dark Pixel. I say, I mean, Resident Arc.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to that.
So we do hunts together and stuff like that. So it's been quite amusing actually. But I don't know. I don't know if I would like recommend it as a serious gaming experience. More. Yeah, because it's just ridiculous. Like the story is insane. They literally ripped off like probably every big franchise or whatever in nerd culture the last decade. So
Yeah.
you're trapped behind this giant wall in the same vein of something like Attack on Titan, but it's Monster Hunter, right? And then
Yeah.
and then at some point you're banished to like the wall has this snowy area that's like the harshest part of the wall, and it looks exactly like the northern wall of Game of Thrones, right? And it's called the Night Rangers. So they just kind of switch things a little bit about, and then it's just it's ridiculous. I don't
It
understand
sounds
it.
wild.
Yeah, you get the Buster Sword and stuff like that. They put the Buster Sword in there for good measure. The special skills of the Buster Swords is literally Climb Hazard, Braver, and Cross Slash.
Mm-hmm.
So it's they just took it like wholesale, just everything. It just makes me smile. Like, how can you do this? How is this even legal? But it's funny. It makes me laugh. So
I had some slight interest in playing it, but I've just not found much time for it. Like I don't even have much time to play FF14 these days, let alone
yeah.
more online games. So I've had some things on my plate. I mean, it looked interesting. I downloaded it just to see how well it can run it. My iPad Pro can run it at max just fine. It
That's
consumes
nice.
my battery faster, but it can run the highest.
That's great.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been playing a couple different things this week. I've been pretty busy myself, but I've kind of gotten a little bit more time into Kingdom Hearts, and then some other games as well, but the main game I want to talk about was a game I was playing last night. Stella Deus, I believe is how you pronounce it. But that's actually a game, Hian, you brought to my attention, and I saw it at a game store. Yeah, way back. And I remember like keeping it on my mind, and I ended up seeing it one day at a used video game store, and I was like, oh, I got to pick this up. So I played it a little bit before, but last night I played it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. You were kind of giving me in the chat some advice on one of the bosses, but how do you feel about that game? Did you ever get very far in that game?
On one hand, I feel as if I feel as if the premise of the game is very compelling and the game is very polished and good. The problem is that I can see hints of the game not getting the right budget for what it was supposed to be, right? Mm-hmm. So not very far into the game, you will start noticing that they're reusing a lot of assets. Enemy models are being reused quite frequently. The soundtrack runs over and over again, and not that that's necessarily a super negative thing. It's just if you're going to make a game that carries on for quite a few hours, I think it's very important to be able to diversify the presentation of the game. So if, let's say you're making a JRPG that's going to last for 40 hours, you can't have a soundtrack that's only one disc worth of tracks, right? You have to start thinking along the lines of something like Final Fantasy. Having kind of like 4 discs with tracks, like 100 tracks or something, because nobody's going to want to hear the same battlefield play on the battle theme, right? Play endlessly on repeat for 40 hours, right? That's not interesting, and it starts grating.
I mean, right? It's a good song, but you don't want to listen on repeat. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I felt as if like the game is great. I love the art style. I love the music. I think the gameplay is great. The story is kind of interesting, but then I'm sitting here thinking like this game would be so much better if they had more budget and they could have had more cutscenes that are kind of on the map, maybe more enemy types, a little bit more music to go around, and then it would have been just a fantastic experience from start to finish. But somewhere down the line it started feeling a bit repetitive because you'd already seen all the enemy types and you'd already heard all the music. And
it sounds like it's a victim of budget.
Yeah, and it would be because it's a pretty strange game. Like it's a I don't know how to put it right. It has a very unique art style. It looks like the old Persona games, like the art style, like Persona 2, like type character art and stuff like that. But it's in a kind of quasi-medieval sci-fi setting, and it's a strategy RPG, and they probably spent a good deal of money on voice acting as well, and they did all the voice acting in English, and it's like, yeah. I don't know.
I can see what you're saying, because just from the couple of hours that I've played, it's kind of like a roller coaster for me. Whereas, at times I'm really impressed with the presentational quality of the game, and then every now and again you'll see a little crack and like, wait, this doesn't quite meet up to the same quality that I saw. But like you said, the art style is very, very unique. It does remind you of some of the earlier Persona games, but one of the things that I really was attracted to was the composer. Is the same composer from Tactics, basically the whole Evil East Alliance games. So the fact that this is a strategy RPG, it feels like it could be a Final Fantasy game to me. Maybe it's because the music just makes me feel like I'm playing Tactics again. But
like
I don't.
1,000 years in the future, 1,000 years, post-apocalyptic fantasy, Evil East.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if a chocobo appeared in this game, I don't think it would be out of place. But it's a good game. It has its highs and lows so far. One of the very first boss battles, I shouldn't say the very first, but one of the early boss battles, Jesus Christ. I think you warned me. You were like, this game needs some rebalancing. And I thought like, okay, he's just like exaggerating. Dude, no, like the boss like killed like one of my characters in like one round. I didn't even get to move. He's got like 840 HP and I'm doing 10 damage. Like this is, oh my God.
So I did want to try that game.
I did.
That's
Yeah.
not the right place to be impressed with the game.
Yeah, but I was like, man, this is like really hard for this early in the game. I did a lot of running away and attacking and healing, but I kind of like games with those kinds of challenges. It just only makes me imagine what the game's going to be like later.
If you think about it, Final Fantasy Tactics was, I think, the hardest time I ever had with Final Fantasy Tactics is more near the beginning of the game than halfway or at the end, because your characters keep getting more and more powerful to the point that you can just like one hit everything. After you get Thunder God Sid, it's you can just you can just like
well, it has that classical Final Fantasy balance, right? All Final Fantasy games are balanced like that, I feel, where if you're a beginner, if you've never really played an RPG before and you jump into a Final Fantasy game, most people, they're kind of, this is kind of hard, right? Because you don't really understand the mechanics and stuff like that. But I feel as if you've played one Final Fantasy game from start to finish, you know what you're supposed to be doing, right? And the first thing you do, right, in Tactics is like, oh, great, like I have a ninja, I have a samurai, put them together. Oh, ninja samurai, right? I can move all over the map. I'm dual wielding katanas. I'm doing like a metric hell ton of damage in a single attack. So you just kind of blast the entire map in a single turn, right?
Unless it's FF15, where if you play another game, it's like, wait, why can't I just hold circle down and win?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's not your first entry into the series.
It's for veterans and newcomers alike. Well, it clearly says at the beginning.
I don't know about that, but it kind of is, I guess. Anyways, speaking of Final Fantasy, though, there's been some news recently regarding the Final Fantasy 7 Remake. I keep saying recently, and I feel like that's not accurate.
Discovered recently.
Yeah, it was covered recently on our shores, anyways. But it was actually an interview, I think, from E3 2018. You were actually the one that translated it, correct? Or parts of it?
Yeah, parts of it. I couldn't be bothered to translate the entire thing just because it's a lot of work, and he didn't really say much that was that interesting. It's a Square Enix like internal interview where probably for marketing and recruitment purposes, where you have like a recruitment page where they're looking for new talent, and then they'll interview people who work in the company and ask them their opinions on what's it like working here, and then it serves as kind of promo, a little soapbox for people who are satisfied with the conditions of the company, right? To talk to new applicants. And so he basically talks mostly about the development process and what kind of duties he's responsible for and what it's like working there. And that doesn't really speak a whole lot to the game, but there was a couple of things that he said about the remake because he's working on the remake, right? And so I took those tidbits that I thought were most relevant, and I made a rough, just my take on it, basically, not a actual like
word for word,
not a word for word translation, just like my impression reading it.
Yeah. Well, first off, when I started seeing videos popping up on YouTube, and then I saw this strange character Hian being mentioned, I was like, oh, I know that guy. So I was really interested to get your point of view. When I talked to you earlier, you were like, some of these people are kind of blowing it out of proportion a little bit. But it seems like the biggest thing people are taking away is this focus on the action element of the game, right? That like it's suddenly like this is some new piece of information, and I felt like we've known it was going a more action route for several years at this point.
If anything, it was kind of like a back. I feel as if it's going a little bit back, right? Because the last piece of news that we had was some other job listing where it was only described as an action game, which had a bunch of people just panicking and going, "Oh no, it's just going to be an action game, no RPG elements," and people just taking that and running with it, which of course is absurd because that's not the takeaway you should have had from that information in the first place. But this guy actually clarifies quite nicely. He talks a lot about how there are limits to the extent that they can do action in Final Fantasy 7, and so they wanted to focus on making the environments, the interaction with the environments, like an action game, right? So he doesn't really talk to the combat at all, So not a whole lot, at least. So
Hmm.
the takeaway here should be that that moving around in Final Fantasy VII is going to be much, in the remake is going to be very much like an action game. Not that the combat itself is going to be like an action game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in all fairness,
but
they did mention in the past that the action wouldn't be to the extent of like 15 or Dissidia or Kingdom Hearts. They would be action focused, but not to those extent, which would make sense given the type of environments that you're given. Maybe there is action, but it's still very grounded. I mean, it's just what I get from it.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I do find it interesting that just like you said, there's still RPG elements that when you actually went through, your basic, not a translation, but a summary of kind of what he said. You're like, you said there's an interesting spot where he basically says that while the current project, Final Fantasy VII Remake, is an RPG with action elements, um, I, they went out of their way, I guess, right, to kind of bring that up. So,
Yeah.
anyways, um, what's your current opinion on the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Are you feeling like this is going to be a PS5 title at this point?
Oh, that's a whole different ballpark. I can't really speak to that. It's uh,
Well, I mean,
depending on
just
how things pan out with the PlayStation 5. I can see this game getting the kind of The Last of Us, Uncharted kind of treatment, where they release it late in the life cycle of PlayStation 4, but then they have like a PlayStation 5, Ultra HD Super Edition on the horizon to sort of tempt people into, if you want the definitive version of Final Fantasy VII Remake, you should get the PlayStation 5 kind of thing. But
Yeah, the
um,
Royal Edition.
yeah, all right, the reunion edition.
Oh, I can already see it.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, my general opinion is that it's kind of hard to peg where the game is because they've kept tight lid on it, and I think for both good and bad reasons, I suppose. But
Hmm.
so it's just very hard to tell where the game is at and what it's going for. But
Well, I mean, it does seem from this recent thing that was translated for us that it seems like the work on it thus far, it seems relatively positive.
yeah,
And the
sure.
way that they're talking about the development, it's not controversial in any way, and it seems like it's a very open environment. People are able to go up to, their supervisor, or it says right here the director, and suggest changes or things they'd like to be implemented into the game. So, I mean, this doesn't seem like, and again, I don't work in the gaming industry, but this doesn't seem like this would be something you would hear from a game that's cruising along, which I don't know if that's really the case, but it seems hopeful to me, at least.
Yeah, I'd say with confidence that the game is developing just fine, and I'd say with confidence that it's probably going to be a good game. But like, there's a difference between a good game and what people are looking for in a Final Fantasy VII remake, right? And so, like, The Last of Us is a great game, but I don't know if you would want to play a Final Fantasy VII that plays like The Last of Us, right? Where it's just like linear levels, and
Yeah.
it's that would be a great game. It just wouldn't be Final Fantasy VII, right? So to me, that's kind of that's the crux of the issue, right? Where I think that you could make a fantastic game, and I think these people can make fantastic games. I don't think that even Final Fantasy 13 and 15, which I don't like in the slightest. I don't think it'd be fair to either of those games to say that they're crappy games or bad games, right? Because when I think of a bad game, like a genuinely bad game, and when you try to scale good versus bad games against each other, a bad game is something like Superman 64, right?
Hmm.
Or Pepsi Man or whatever, right? These trash games that are literally trash games, right? They don't work right. They're buggy and everything's just bogged down and nobody wants to play them. That's a trashy game. And
Right.
by any stretch of the imagination, Final Fantasy 15 and 13 are not those kind of games. So it isn't really fair to those games to say that they're trash games, right? Um, but they're not games that are to the liking of a lot of people who are interested in Final Fantasy games. And so I can see the same thing being a problem with the 7 remake, where it's basically like a good game. It's just not what anyone really wanted out of the remake. So I find myself being 10% hopeful, and then 40% kind of, scared, and then 40% trying to be open-minded and just maybe just accept whatever they make as on its own merits. And then the last 10% is the negative part of me that goes, this is going to be trash, like fuck it, right? But I try to keep a lid on that, because I don't want to be consumed by them, right? I don't want to spoil my own experience by letting into that kind of inclination. So
yeah, what I'm hoping most, I mean, what people need to accept is this is not going to be the original Final Fantasy VII. It's just not going to be. It's going to be, what I do hope from it, the better say, is that they understand why the story, the world, and the characters worked in the previous, and try to translate that into a modern day game. If they can do that, I think it'll be a faithful remake. Despite if they make it like action heavy or decide to go in a more linear fashion. If they can accomplish those three things for me, myself personally, then I think they have a good game in their hands. Oh, and if the materia system's still awesome.
Yeah. So so that's kind of the thing, right? Oh, well, I'll let At go ahead. My freaking ping,
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, well, I mean, according to Katase anyways, everything that we liked in the original is going to be in the remake, everything. So at least that's what I read in an article. So I don't know why he would say such a thing, but...
That's already wrong, because they don't have the command-based system in it.
Yeah, I was like, what if I like that? But I see what he was just trying to alleviate all these questions of, is this going to be in the game? Is this going to be in the game? But I mean, I see where you're coming from. It's not necessarily, I can't imagine it's going to be a terrible game by any means. I mean, I don't think Square generally makes, I would say, terrible games. Like you said, 13 and 15, you can't honestly say they're terrible. They're just not what people expected, right?
Disappointing and flawed.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. But, they're not, people still enjoy those games today, especially 13. Sure. So there is something there for some people, but I don't know, man. I don't know. The part of me that gets nervous is, as being a Final Fantasy fan, it's just like, ooh, you're actually doing this. If you goof this up, like, because you haven't really had the fans in the last couple of entries. If you goof this one up, I don't think people are going to take too kindly. People might be a little more reserved about the future of this franchise. Obviously, it's still going to continue on, but it just makes me nervous.
That's probably also, like, a lot of people think that Square Enix, like, why don't you show more of the remake? But really, there's not a whole lot to be gained from showing anything of the remake until it's practically on the shelf, right? Because firstly, the thing markets itself. A lot of people don't realize that if you go right now out, like, if I go out my house right now and go to 7-Eleven and pick up like a weekly Famitsu and look at the most anticipated game chart that they have, Final Fantasy VII Remake is either number 1 or number 2, and has been ever since it's been announced, like the entire fetching time. And even after Kingdom Hearts got closer to release, it still couldn't push the remake off first place. It's not until now, like the last month, that it's the 2 last months or so, it's managed to do that. So this is a game that people are so freaking anticipated about that you don't even have to do anything. You don't have to market it at all, because everybody knows it's there, right? Everybody knows what this game is, and everybody who has any positive inclination towards buying it are probably going to buy it regardless of how you market it at some point. So the only thing you have to gain from showing stuff is that you decrease the novelty of it, right? So right now we don't know what this game is going to be like at all, right? So once we get the game in front of us, right, it's there, and it's fresh and new, and we don't know how it's going to play, we don't know how it's going to look, and that might actually, in a sense, kind of emulate the original sensation of the release of Final Fantasy VII, because when this game was first released, Final Fantasy had never been released in Europe before. Nobody knew what it was. Final Fantasy VI, while a popular game, wasn't like that huge of a game either when you think about sort of the total scope of the gaming market at the time. So I think most Americans as well who picked up Final Fantasy VII had probably not played a whole lot of Final Fantasy games before. So everybody was walking into this game that they didn't know what was, and they just looked at the box, and you looked at the back of the box, and you saw like
Yeah.
snowboarding and like Ifrit like breathing fire and stuff, and
Like, oh, this looks sweet. Yeah.
This looks crazy. What the fetch is this, right? And
Yeah.
You can't do that now because everybody knows what Final Fantasy VII is. But you can kind of emulate that experience by keeping total radio silence, right, and not telling us what it is, and then just going haywire with what you're making, right? So maybe they're hoping to do that, to give us that feeling back, right, of what is this, and build excitement through that kind of approach instead. So maybe it's a stroke of genius right there to not tell us anything about it.
You know what's the biggest thing I'm still wondering? And they haven't really addressed it again. And I'm kind of wondering how they're going to approach it now since they dropped Cyber Connect, I believe it was. Cyber Connect.
Cyber Connect 2 or something like that.
And they started from the beginning by them internally. Is it still episodic? Is it gonna? Are they gonna try to make 3 full games like the 13 trilogy, or is it going to be like kind of like mobile where they drop off at a certain point and it continues the same game from there, or like that? That's something I definitely want to know.
That's honestly been one of the biggest pieces of, I don't want to say criticism, but a general sense of negativity is the fact that the game is episodic. That seems like something that a lot, I don't want to say everyone because I can't speak for everyone, but I see it all the time. People are just not happy that the game is episodic. I don't blame them because, who wants to start a story and then, have to wait however long for the next part, and then you have to wait however long for the next part. That's not the Final Fantasy VII experience they had when they were a kid. They had the full game. They played it to the beginning, middle, end, and it was great. So, I don't know if they could, but if they could come out and say, okay, it's no longer episodic, it's one game, I think that would turn the tide for a lot of people who are speaking negatively about this game. But I don't know if that's unrealistic.
But that might also be a stroke of brilliance, right? Because we don't have any idea how they're restructuring the story, right? And just to recap, right?
Sure.
In the first CG trailer that we got, the first shot that we got there was of the old school Avalanche soldiers infiltrating a reactor, right? So that's way before. So that's like before Crisis level storytelling right there, right? So I don't know if they're still keeping that around, but there was also an interview where I think Kitase or Nagura, one of them, said that the game wouldn't begin with the iconic intro at the train platform. It would begin somewhere else. And so when they say they're going to release the game in parts, I'm not entirely sure that it's warranted to think that means necessarily chopping up the story that we got in the original game, because they might not be confining the remake to just that story. For all we know, right, they're restructuring the entire thing. Maybe the first game is kind of, I don't know, like a new kind of
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and like the first game could be like Final Fantasy VII, like we know it, right? And then the second part could be a prequel that kind of rewrites and fixes, I don't know, like before Crisis Core, and kind of bulks that into a single experience. And then the third game could be a sequel, right? That I don't know, changes sort of whatever the story was before, right? With Advent Children and Dirge of Servants and that crap, right?
Yeah.
So,
well,
I think Ozzy misput my. I think that my thought process along with his. If I had to take a guess, it could easily be your way, but. What I see is like exactly like the Xenosaga games. By themselves, they're each a fulfilling game, but they are technically a continuation. But each game has a 3-act structure, a climax, a satisfying conclusion with a cliffhanger that can lead on to the second to third game. Definitely possible they can do a structure like that, and they improve upon and taking criticism the first game to make the second one better. Then same with the third one, because
I
they
do.
did mention that like
Sorry.
each episode was going to feel like a full game.
Yeah.
So just for example's sake, just say like the entire first game is from the beginning to let's just stretch it to Eris dies.
Yeah.
That could be like the first game, and then the satisfying conclusion is that like we want to get Sephiroth for what happened here, yada yada, and then like the game starts off on the snow and like in the northern crater area in the second game.
Yeah,
I
or like
tend
the
to-
Trails games, right? They're also like that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I tend to think like just like you said, Eric, and you were saying kind of a similar deal. But since they're going to be expanding so much on the story, it seems like, because they're going to have to do that if they're going to make it episodic. We don't know how many episodes, but I'm just assuming 3, and that seems like the general consensus. Could be many more though. But if it's going to be a 40-hour game, roughly, for each episode, I mean, they're going to have to jam a lot of extra story in there. And like sometimes when I see people complaining about the episodic nature, they tend to frame it like, well, it's going to be the beginning of the game where he jumps off the train, and then when he leaves Midgar, and then that's it. Well, and it's like, well, it's not going to be that exact sequence of events, right? Because that would only be like 10 hours or 8 hours. That would be kind of crappy. There's going to be Go ahead, sorry.
No. You can finish your thought. Sorry. It's
Well,
just
from at least what I've seen online, is that they're going to be expanding more on some of these other characters, like Jesse, for example, and really kind of delving into their background and getting to know those characters more. So I do think it is going to be basically more of a reimagined Final Fantasy VII than a remake.
Yeah, for sure. And they've been pretty open about those kind of things, I suppose. But the thing about this take that they're going to have to blow things out a lot, I think, is in a sense not very warranted, because it's assuming that each of these parts are in sense going to play and be structured also in terms of its gameplay like a general JRPG, right? And that's kind of what we should expect. But I mean, if you're comparing the worst case scenario here, like if you're comparing it to a game like, say, The Last of Us, or I don't know, the other one from Naughty Dog, Uncharted, right? These are not, as far as I know, they're not 40-hour games, right? But you don't have people walking around like, Jesus, this has to be it's not 40 hours, so it's not a complete game, right? Nobody says about a 20-hour action game that, Jesus, this feels incomplete, because you don't have 40 hours of gameplay in it, right? So you put a different standard on those kinds of games, and I feel as if you imagine that one thing that they're definitely going to be doing with action combat and with action elements in the environments is that the environments themselves are going to take longer to navigate, right? Because you have to expand the environments to make room for the action combat, right? So whereas in the original game, you hit the Materia Cave after you cross the swamp with a huge, with the Midgar Zolom, right? Running through the Materia Caves only takes something like 10 minutes, right? If you're not fighting a whole bunch, right? You can just kind of run through it, and then it's like 4 screens or something, and then you're done with it, right? That's a dungeon in the old Final Fantasy, right? That's nothing. And then you take something like, if you make that sequence an action sequence, right? Where you have to kind of roam through this large environment to make room for the enemies, and maybe you fight 5 or so, encounters along the way, and maybe they've added some climbing mechanics and all that kind of stuff. Then suddenly that Materia Cave is like an hour of gameplay, right? It's 3 or 4 times as long, right?
Right. So a lot of that time might just be traversing or traveling to the new location, as opposed
through the
to
areas and the fights, right? And then, of course, you're not getting the text bubbles that you can just kind of scroll through. Now you're actually listening to the voice acting, which also draws the scenes out, right? And you're adding sort of dynamic camera motion and stuff like that. Every cutscene is going to be 3 or 4 times longer as well because of those elements. So just looking at something that took 30 minutes in the original game is now going to take an hour or 2 hours to do, because there's more runtime, there are longer cutscenes with voice acting. So the idea that you would necessarily have to pad it to make it longer is not even something I agree with in the first place, because
yeah, it's true.
Yeah, that seems to be coming from people who don't really understand what goes into really expanding these kind of things into HD in the first place. It's you have to be comparing it to something like Uncharted. Like imagine what it takes like to run through a level in Uncharted, right? And then you make a comparison to that's what it's going to be to just move from a sector to Walmart, right? Walmart or whatever, and you know through the place with all the robotic debris and stuff like that. That's probably going to be its own freaking level. It's going to take 30 minutes, right? Took 5 minutes in the original.
I'm thinking of that Materia cave, and it has like a whole scene of, I think it was Sang, Elena, and Rude. And they're conversing with all the characters. It's like you would have to put that whole thing in. And in the original game, it's just a small scene that comes and goes very quickly.
Yeah. But now it's the camera's going to pan, and then they're going to talk, and then they're going to change camera angles 5 times, and then they're going to talk some more, right? And suddenly that scene eats up 15 minutes, where it flew by in 2 in the original, right? So I don't know how much they need to pad it, but if they're going to add story as well, that's a lot of content. That's easily like just getting to Junon, right, and passing the sea. And if they're expanding Midgard, that in and of itself, I can imagine that even almost with no padding, still easily eating up 30 hours or so.
Right. So once they add in the extended story with Jesse and the rest of the crew, and maybe a little extra with Cloud and his background or something like that, it's easily going to hit 40 hours for sure.
Yeah, and if like the traversal between Calm and Midgar, say, right? How are they gonna handle that, right? In the original, they had a freaking they had the world map. You know, you just ran across the world map.
Took
5 minutes, right?
If that, yeah.
Yeah, if even that, right? So what are you going to do there? Are they going to have 2 hours of running through Wildbrush, maybe, with tons of enemies and a couple of extra cutscenes along the way, right? Maybe they stop and
they're going to have to throw like a extra boss in there probably, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe they stop over the night and you have like a Final Fantasy 15 type fireplace kind of scene where they, they watch the moon together and you get some additional dialogue where they sit around and, relax for a while, right? And then when morning comes, you have to start moving again, and like there is a lot of room for padding that I wouldn't consider padding in that.
So, given because you do have a little more of a background in game design than we do, obviously, from the past, what do you think do you agree with the sentiment though, given your thoughts, just what you explained right there, that just the fact that they're making this a more modern game, that's obviously going to drag the game out a little bit more. Do you agree that the game has to be multiple entries, that they couldn't do it in a single game without cutting content? Because that was the original argument being made, right?
That's so difficult to tell, right? Because everybody who comments on this seems to have some kind of preconceived notion about what the game, quote unquote, has to be. And the fact of the matter is that the game doesn't really have to be anything, right? The thing about game design is that it's inherently contrived, which means that whatever a game turns out being is whatever framework that you yourself chose for the game, right? So when a game designer says it has to be one way, that the only thing that tells us is that they have a certain framework, and that within that framework it has to be that way. But there's nothing to say that they had to have that framework in the first place, right? So that's your choice as a designer, right? So sure, if you told me that we're literally going to make a planet-sized open world, right? That and Midgar is going to be as big as New York City, and then Calm is going to be the size of like a small town in Nebraska or whatever, and then we're going to have like farmlands all over the place, and we're going to do that with every single location in the game, and it's going to take a week to go from one end to the other. It's like, sure.
You're gonna have to cut some content if you want it in one game. Yeah,
that's maybe not feasible, right? You could probably put it in one game, but it's going to be like 200 gigs on your disk, and it's going to take forever to make it. But yeah, I don't think that's the game they're making. To be honest,
you know FF7's story in and out. Do you feel that there's certain content and story parts that they could cut out to make more time for more important scenes in the game?
That's a good question.
That's a good question. It's a very hard question though, because I feel as if there's not all that much fat on Final Fantasy VII as a game, really, when you think about it. Like the fat of Final Fantasy VII is usually kind of spent. Well, some people would consider it fat. I know that a lot of people feel as if the game drags on the second disc. They feel as if like the plot's not moving forward because you're doing all this other peripheral stuff rather than going straight after Sephiroth. There are even a lot of people who feels like the section between sort of leaving Midgar and catching up to Sephiroth is more or less, that's all just fat, right? Some people feel like that's padding. And I'm like, that's the favorite part of my game. The favorite part of my game is like the road trip going from Midgar and all the way through over to Junon, over the sea, and then hitting Gold Saucer, then going to Cosmo Canyon and stuff like that. Those are my favorite parts of the game. So that's not padding in my mind. That's where you get the most important character building.
What's interesting about that, though, is one of the criticisms I've seen is that, well, you know, the game doesn't really, there's no real reason for you to go to all these places. The only reason you're going there is because the game's linear. Like, that's the only place you can go, right? A lot of times. And
that's going to be Sephiroth, though. That's the thing, right? You're always on his back, right? Or right. So you think it's him, but like still.
It's just going to be interesting how it plays out with this game. I'm assuming you're going to have more options than simply, well, you can stay at this town or you can go to the next town. So,
yeah, like if I had a choice, if I was going to make it, I would, like if I had infinite amount of money, I'd make it like a huge, expansive open world. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But
it's going to be VR.
Yeah. But it's I would structure it maybe kind of like Xenoblade 1. Or something like that. Have these, of course, even larger maps because you can probably extend them a lot nowadays, right? And then I would probably set it up so that you leave Midgar and then you're in this lush kind of open field. What's the name of the plains in Xenoblade 1?
Gaza,
yeah, they are plains, something like that. Maybe, just a little bit bigger, right? And then you have a calm somewhere in the horizon. Maybe a thing that I think could be cool if they're going to expand on things is maybe if you can kind of pick the scenic route and kind of walk, or maybe you could stop by a gas station and rent a motorcycle for Cloud, and they could be in the van again, and maybe you could take the go by road, because obviously like the infrastructure in the original game is ludicrous, right? There is no infrastructure in the original game. There are no roads. It's like
yeah.
The thing is that if you're going to make this game look realistic, you're going to have to do things with the world, because the world doesn't make a lick of sense, like logistically, if you start thinking about it. Like nothing grows in Midgar, right? It's all dead, right? And you have this huge New York City sized thing. They can't grow their own food, right? So the question becomes, where did they get their food from? Are you telling me they produce all the food for all the people in Midgar in Calm, in that little? They have like, and then it's like, how do they transport the food? They don't have any roads, right? Are they going to just kind of pull it by cart through the woodlands and just wait for all the crazy robots and weird mutants to attack them on the way, right? There has to be some kind of changes to the world to make this seem a little bit more.
And I think Nomura actually talked about that, I believe, just saying that like as they've made the game, they've realized like certain aspects of the game prior just didn't make sense once you updated the visuals. Like for example, with Aerith's house, like why is there a river flowing under her house? This doesn't make sense where it's at in the location. You don't ever see this river ever again. Like what's the deal with that? So that is go ahead.
No, like, yeah, there's just so much room for change there that can add, I think, not necessarily things that everybody's going to like or that has inherent value, but there seems to be lots of room here to do things that are not necessarily going to be bad for the game, right? That I think are going to overall perhaps make the game experience a bit more interesting. Like, I think it would be very cool, as I said, if you could go to like a gas station and rent a motorcycle for Cloud, right? Because it's such a waste that you only get it in that one time. Like, it would be really cool to drive through the world of Final Fantasy VII on that nice motorcycle. Maybe have the rest of your characters in another like van following you and stuff like that. And it wouldn't really have to be a problem long term either, because you can't drive a motorcycle through a swamp, right? So you'd still have to go and get your chocobo, right? Get to the other side. And you could have other reasons, like you could add military checkpoints, Shinra checkpoints along the way, right? Small like military checkpoints along the highway or whatever that you could either sneak by, get off your vehicles and like sneak by them, or you could just blast through them with Barrett or whatever. There are many ways in which you can make this more interesting gameplay wise.
Yeah. Those types of additions would actually really excite me because that would just make the game that much more immersive and would really provide a new experience to something I hold deeply to my heart. So
not only that, we only explore 2 to 3 sectors of Midgar in the game. And there's 8 sectors, and there's an upper plate and a lower plate to each sector. There's so much that you could do there. I don't know if it would be a good idea to do it, but I believe you could rewrite it to venture into these other places if written well.
Yeah, sure. So, like, one thing is pacing, right? Because that's for a game that tells a story, pacing is important, right? So, there's a lot of people out there whose minds are going crazy right now, but all the stuff you can add to the game, right? But they don't seem to think like the step ahead here, that if you're adding all this crap to the game, right, when's the next story beat coming, right? When's, are you just going to bog the story down now? You're going to spend 5 hours learning about Jesse before you learn anything about like Shinra, which is a lot more relevant before you learn about Sephiroth and stuff. And so I feel as if they can't add just whatever they can willy-nilly. Yeah. They have to be careful, right? But I agree that you could do some really sweet stuff story-wise, like adding a little bit to the rest of Avalanche is a good idea, right? You could have before you go to the second reactor, Jesse makes the new ID pads, right? The new ID cards that they get caught with in the ID check because she made Cloud special or whatever. You could add a side quest there, right? So she needs to go out and get like the raw materials, or she needs to go and steal some key cards, right? That she can work off of, right? So she could say, Cloud, can you tag along and protect me or whatever? And then the two of them have to like go up onto the plate and find some key cards, like rob somebody and take their key cards or whatever in preparation for the second mission, right? So that's a good, that you can use that as an excuse to.
And I think they could tie a lot of those story beats in with the main narrative too. Like, why is Jesse angry at Shinra, right? Yeah. All we know is she wants to save the planet, but we don't know, like...
Yeah, so that's a good chance.
Do you have some experience that causes this hatred? So... I think there's opportunity.
She can give the Cloud that exposition as they travel up to the plate, right? So that's a...
Yeah, on top of that, we don't... I mean, we kind of do, like when Barrett intimidates the man going to work despite the emergency happening, but we could get a better idea of the difference between the upper class and the lower class citizens. It's like you see how the upper class are living prosperous and people in the lower class are just like having a hard time. They despise Shinra. I mean, it'd be pretty cool to get a little stronger context. Like you get the gist of it in the original game, but maybe a side quest also. Like maybe you have to go to the upper plate to get something, and while you're up there, you see like how great it is to live up there compared to down below. Like you don't even need to like straight out tell you. It's just like while you go up there and get it, you're like, wow, I'd much rather live up here than down there.
Yeah, exactly, right? You could do a lot of stuff like that. So I see a lot of room there for just a little bit of addition. So as I said, I think it would be a good idea to have Cloud and Jesse head up, get the key cards or stuff like that. And that could be
How do you all feel? I hate to transition us off this, but how do you all feel about the gameplay aspect with the fact that, it isn't going to be turn-based, it is going to be more action-oriented, and the fact that Nomura is involved with this project, and that could be a good, I don't know, what do you think? Yeah.
Oh, what do I think? Well,
because I mean, I have my reservations, but I feel like I've spouted a couple billion times, so I'm interested to hear what.
Oh, that's such a I think you could create a cool action game out of Final Fantasy VII, to be honest, or like an action RPG. But but the real problem for me are twofold, and then I'm gonna hit on some positive stuff at the side. But I mean, the main problem for me is that every single action RPG title that Square Enix has produced has not had a very interesting magic system, right? You look at Type Zero, you look at Final Fantasy 15, even Crisis Core and stuff like that. They have very the magic is basically just like a super attack. Like press a button, things dies. You don't really have access to a whole lot of magic at once. It's usually very cumbersome to change what kind of magic you want to use, and you can't do the things that people, I would argue, probably enjoy as a staple of the franchise, which is getting creative with the magic. So in the original Final Fantasy 7, cast reflect on yourself and cast a spell on yourself and bounces back like 6 times or whatever.
Right. There's a lot of those strategy elements that are going to be difficult to implement in a more action-oriented system.
If you put magic in action, right? And so the first worry I have going action is that I feel like you're going to lose a lot of the identity of the original game if all you basically do is the Kingdom Hearts thing, where you just kind of run around and just swing like a moron for killing critters, right, until you hit this HP sponge boss that you have to do some skills on, right, or whatever.
I remember in the tech footage, like when they showed like a slight bit of the FF7 combat, or like what they want to do with it. I think I saw a casting bar when they chose like fire. I think it was a picture of Barrett choosing fire when you controlled over to him.
I think he was using something equivalent to Big Shot at the time, because he was like, but I'm not entirely sure about that. The only thing that I'm worried about is that we're going to lose, that it's going to be reduced to like this special attack that is just like you press a button and you use ice, and ice does damage, right? And then you have cure, which heals, but it's like there's nothing more than that. There's none of the kind of cure plus all or added effect, or like these kind of interesting combos like of materia and stuff like that. If they remove that, that would suck, obviously.
That would be disappointing.
Maybe they could add a cooldown system where you use fire, but once you use it, you have to wait 10 seconds to use it again.
Well, as long as whatever they do, as long as they don't take the 15 route of having your magic hurt your own party members.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, actually, as a strategy component. But I don't think
it was implemented well in that game.
Maybe not. Yeah, but it's kind of like annoying because you're playing with the AIs, right? And so when the AI runs into the fire and kills themselves, that's frustrating.
Yeah, you're like, so you're
that wasn't my fault. Like, why am I being punished for the AI being retarded, right? That's right. Not. But
clearly, what kind of person would actually run into this fire? Nobody.
So, but as a thing to watch out for when you're casting it and stuff like that, I think is valid, right? You shouldn't be casting fire straight at your own allies either, right? So that might be depends on how you do it, obviously. But that's like my one worry about how is in regards to how they handle magic. Obviously, my second worry is I'm not a huge fan of flashy combat, right? So
that's Nomura's thing, though, right?
Yeah, right. So not just because of I just think it looks dumb. Like I don't really like the kind of well, sometimes in like wushu movies and Chinese martial arts movies, I'm okay with a little bit of wire fu, but generally the Japanese flashy thing, which is like huge like bars of light shooting out of your sword and stuff like that, I'm not a huge fan of it. I feel it's kind of tacky, and it doesn't really look interesting to me when they're just kind of flailing the sword so fast you can't see it and stuff like that. I don't find that impressive. I find that the half-life on that in terms of entertainment is really, really small. Because I believe in contrast being powerful, right? So if you want to make a powerful kind of attack come off as being properly powerful, then you have to have it relationally to attacks that don't look very powerful, right? So you have those regular kind of low-key attacks, and then suddenly you get a spike, right? And then that's going to feel impressive. That's going to have a payoff. But if you're doing these Advent Children style like crap like all over the place all the time, then it doesn't have a payoff because you're flatlining all the time. It's like structuring of regular movies and stuff like that. And so I'm afraid that the battle system is going to be way too like over the top at all times, And I also think it kind of detracts from the plot, right? Because then you have Advent Children, Cloud can literally almost fly in this thing, right? And then you go back to the original game, and then you have Cloud hanging onto the platform for his dear life, right? After the robot explodes. And you're like, Cloud, you can just pick yourself up and just, you control your Buster Swords with your fingers. Like, why is this a problem? You have the grip strength to like crush cars. Like,
yeah, it doesn't match the narrative for sure.
Yeah,
it always bothered me where, like, Advent Children especially, Cloud has this big Buster Sword he can wield with one hand, swing it around like faster than someone can with a normal sized sword. So, and then another person comes with like a sword or a stick towards him. If he has that kind of strength, and he should just be knocking them back constantly every time he hits a sword, but they hit just as hard back at him. And it just feels weird. You never really feel the weight of the Buster Sword hit them very much, and it kind of feels off-putting in that. That's why I hope in this that, like, when Cloud swings at something, like, there's a lot of weight to it. Like, something's getting crushed, something's getting sliced in half from like an execution style swing to it.
And I like, the thing is, I want the combat to be grounded, and that's to say I don't want to have tons of like light particles and shit all over the screen all the time. I would like the combat to be grounded, and for him to like do regular sword cuts that like just an animation of a sword cutting. And then when you get your limit break, they can go all out, like in the original game where he does Braver and there's a flash of light and he crushes stuff, right? But that stuff should be reserved for opportune moments where you're using special skills. It shouldn't be something that you're spamming constantly and just cover your screen in this hilarious light show like you see in Kingdom Hearts. I just find that obnoxious, right? I want to see the environment. I want to see my characters. I don't want everything to be absorbed by like color lights, like somebody's firing fireworks at the screen while I'm trying to play. Like, it just doesn't appeal to me.
I see what you're saying. I mean, it's not that, you're not against the light show, right? You want Knights of the Round to be impressive.
Sure.
But like your day-to-day attack does not need to be equivalent to that. And that's one of the... Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the things that of one areas of positivity I did have over the 15, which I would like to see in the 7 remake, is just when you summoned something, right? That was an experience. Like the first time, it was like, Jesus Christ, like this is nuts. And if they could kind of bring that magnitude to some of the more special abilities, that would be really, really cool.
Yeah, but I also have some positivity towards the battle system. So they mentioned that they've been doing that. They have a focus on cover mechanics, and I recently played the last story again, which is one of my favorite games. And I know that Nomura and Kitase have had a lot of communication with Sakaguchi over the last couple of years. So I'm hoping they do something similar to that, where there's an active emphasis on sort of, let's say you can crouch behind cover to avoid sort of fire attacks or whatever, and that you can do kind of jump out dash attacks with Cloud, or that there's like an emphasis on combining, that you have environmental skills that tie in together with your regular combat skills, just to make moving around more dynamic. Because in something like Type 0 or 15, you're basically kind of just running up to enemies and just kind of bashing them. You're not really using... you're not really kind of, vaulting over crates or whatever, or doing anything interesting with the environment. And I think that's kind of like, that's a lost opportunity for an action game. If you play, I just remember playing, that's not really like a super impressive action game, but I remember playing the Jedi Academy games with Kyle Katarn, right? Where you can do like, you can run up walls and stuff and do like these vaults off the walls, and you can throw your lightsaber around corners and stuff. Yeah. I really like the lightsaber combat in that game. I'm not saying I would want the remake to play like that, but it would be interesting if they allowed you to do like cool stuff like that. I don't just contextual commands or whatever. Just make it a bit more interesting. And I also think that the last story had some interesting ideas in regards to the casting of magic and stuff like that, because although your main character can't cast magic, you can give commands to your other like mages to use magic. And basically what happens is that, the time slows and the camera like goes up above the characters, and you get like a reticule that you can move along the ground. and then be like, you're going to cast fire here, right? And then it zooms back in again, and you're back in the action, and then your NPC like does the spell. I would like to see something like that for the Magic, that you can, then maybe when you're playing it regularly, you can run around freely and do regular attacks and stuff like that. But then once your ATB bar charges up, you can press triangle to open like a classic command menu, and then select a spell, and then time kind of freezes or goes slow motion.
For you to be able to make a wise choice.
Yeah, where you can then move a reticle around and kind of maybe, okay, we're going to throw magic here, and then time resumes, and then Cloud does the magic. And, you can kind of pass out commands to your other characters in the heat of the moment as well. If they can do that, then I think we have a cool action system that can...
One thing that would concern me about a cover system, as much as I like the idea, like it'd be a cool idea of like the Guard Scorpion, the first boss, Barret and Cloud versus him. And he starts up his charge attack where he just shoots it like a laser beam.
Yeah.
Like horizontally, it's like you can get behind a wall and dodge it. The one thing I'm concerned about is if you have a level of control for the 3 characters, and if you're Cloud, you decide to get back into the cover, how do you tell Barret to do that? Does the AI just know the instinct to get in the back? Or will it not matter if you're not on that character?
That's one thing... I'm sorry. I was just going to say real quick, that's one area of concern that I had that I was going to tack on to your point there was generally it's kind of, I haven't had too good of experience with more action-oriented battle systems with party-based combat for that specific purpose. I mean, usually they can refine it well enough for your main hero that you're controlling, but it usually becomes an issue that eventually your party is just going to do something that you don't want them to do, and it's not realistic for you to be able to control every action unless you go more of like a gambit based system like 12 did, and even then it's not necessarily what you want them to do in the moment. You're pre-planning.
That's why I hope, as I said, like the way that I would do it personally, I don't know that they will do this, is that you have, as I said, like you have your sort of your regular base combat, which you don't really need to control too much, right? Just kind of running around, dodging and hitting your basic attack, right? Which this is something that you can usually, fairly kind of allow your AI to do for the most part, right? But there should be like separate ATB bars for each of them, and if it fills up, as I said, like you press triangle, and then you kind of freeze time, and you have sort of the ability to administer commands for, magic and items and stuff like that when the ATB bar is full, right? And at that point, combat either goes full halt or it goes like slow-mo, right? So you're not in like a spot of trouble. But for things like covering and stuff like that, I think having a sort of light gambit system or alternative, just like an echo system, is probably the best. The good thing about echo systems is that you have, let's say you need to run away to hide behind a wall or something. You just make it so that if you're actually doing this, the moment you press that goddamn cover command, all your other characters follow you like an echo. They'll do the exact same thing. So they'll just spread out to the nearest cover, and they'll cover as well, because that's what you're doing. And so obviously that's what they should be doing right there and then, right?
Right.
And if you're running around using regular attacks, they too should be running around doing regular attacks. If you're running away, they too should immediately be running away, right? Just have them echo. When it comes to like these specific commands, they should be echoing you generally, I think. So that's that. I think that would suffice for the most part, and then you could manually administer items and magic commands.
Or you can even manually administer commands to other party members, where like you can hit left on the D-pad for like take cover. Like take cover, and then like the characters respond to you, take cover.
Yeah, like you only need probably like 4 commands, right? So the D-pad is perfect for that. I don't think you would need like tons of commands. So you're right about that.
Yeah, you don't need a keyboard. That's for sure.
Like go all out, be supportive, play defensively, that type of deal.
Yeah, support and heal, aggressive and attack, and go cover, and then maybe run away or something like that. That probably suffice for like the base gameplay.
How do you all think this is going to transition from game to game if it continues to be an episodic nature? Are you going to? Well, it seems like they're going to go a more like a Mass Effect route, I would assume, or where you can carry certain things over from game to game. I don't, but I'm assuming somebody that just buys the game 2, and that's the first game they buy, if they want to start there, they would have like a base model party basically where you should be at that point in the game, I would assume.
I mean, it could go either way. I mean, it depends if they like do a major shift in the battle system. Then I would suppose it would be hard to carry over the stuff. But if it's going to be like the same battle system with like some improvements, some quality of life stuff, I can see them just transferring from one to another. And if you buy like the second game and never played the first one, they might just start you at a default level or something like that. But it's probably more beneficial to do that, or they could just.
Well, I mean, I would want to retain the materia that I've gotten. I would want to retain like the various experience that I've gained. Granted, if you leave somebody with the first game for 2 years, they're going to level Cloud up to level 99. But by the time you get to game 2, but they could just level cap it.
Yeah, that's true. They can level cap it. It would feel weird narrative wise also if you start the second game without playing the first one, and then you just have like a certain amount of levels and skills and abilities also.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a level of expectation from you to know it. If I go back to the Xenosaga games, it's it was they're complete games technically 1, 2, and 3 while going on a continuation. So it could just start back from level 1. But then again, it would feel weird narrative wise that you're in the middle of the journey and you're back at level 1. It's like like gameplay narrative wise, it may be off putting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that if they make it like a series in a sort of really kind of series kind of sense, it's probably going to be just like the Trails of Trails games, like the Trail of Cold Steel and Trails of what is the other one?
Cold Steel 2.
No, like the like you have the Cold Steel, and then you have the other one. It's not
Trails in the
Sky. Trails in the Sky. Yeah, they'll probably do something similar to those games. But as I said, I personally think that we really don't know what they mean when they say series, and personally, I'm leaning towards thinking that either it's not going to be a series at all, like they're confining it to a single game. They've changed this because because that was CyberConnect's 240. They did that with hack games, right? And Square Enix doesn't really have a history of building games in that sense, right? So I'm not sure about that, but like if they end up making it a series, I really think that we might be looking at very kind of separate kind of games where we don't necessarily have to worry about that at all. As I said, like the first game kind of covering the primary arc of Final Fantasy VII, and then the second game covering some kind of before prequel kind of arc, and the third game covering some kind of sequel arc. And in that case, you'd be playing as different characters anyway, so it wouldn't really matter.
Yeah, and I do think a concern of theirs would be that they do want people to be able to jump in at any point, right? They don't.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing you want is for people to feel like they have to play the first 2 games to play the third one. So,
that is true.
That definitely makes sense to me.
And they have said that this is a new continuity. It's not in continuity with the old compilation anymore. That's not canon as far as the remake is concerned. So they're.
Are you telling me my favorite character, Genesis, is no longer canon in this new universe?
Yeah, probably not. And, well, I could see them. That's the thing. Obviously they're going to use concepts, and again, some people don't seem to like register like the nuance and the difference there. Of course, they're going to be using the compilation, but the remake is not in the compilation timeline as it is right now. So I think that while they'll definitely add story elements and concepts from the compilation, those elements are going to act as if they're not from the compilation as it is, right? It's going to be a new timeline, new continuity, as it were, right? So maybe you'll see Genesis, but he won't be exactly as he was in the original game, because where he appeared, because that's not in the timeline, right? So maybe he has a new face, maybe he has a new personality, maybe it doesn't read Loveless all the time, right? We have no way of knowing that.
I kind of think of it like an old movie in the remake. Like you have like I'll just use RoboCop for an example. You have RoboCop 1, you have 2, and you have 3. You have a whole series out of that. But in 2014 they remade RoboCop. It's got some of the same clicks as the first movie, It's got the same story overall, but in the end of the day, it's a reimagining. It's just only going through the strokes of it, and not like scene by scene by scene
Sure.
on that at all. So it could be like that, where they like just they have the characters, they have the story, but they go about it in a different modern way.
Yeah, so for sure, I think there are going to be scenes. They're going to obviously they're going to expand on like the Crisis Core stuff, right? And having Zack's story, but there's no guarantee that that's going to play out like in the compilation. It's probably not, because it's not in that continuity. There's things that don't make sense in that and stuff like that. So, maybe Zack's backstory will be different now. Maybe there's no Angeal and no, Genesis, but it's still kind of similar in certain beats, right? It's hard to tell. So,
I mean, I do think the fact that they are going back and, being a little more liberal with what they take in from the compilation, that does make me feel, that doesn't make me feel bad. I do think there's some things that were good there, some things that weren't good, and I'm okay with that. I wouldn't like it if it was an all or nothing approach. I don't think that would be the correct way to go about it.
So, like, obviously they're borrowing from the compilation, and we should have, because like the first CG trailers, as I said, you had the Before Crisis former Avalanche people infiltrating the reactor scene, which that's not in the original game, but they don't look exactly like the ones in Before Crisis either. They've evolved, right? So now they have a sword on their back and machine guns, and they look slightly different. They still have the goggles, and like the beret has turned into like a bandana. It's a different color, but they're still wearing greens and stuff like that, so you can tell. And it's the same thing with the Cloud's Buster Sword, right? It's not entirely the original sword, and it's not entirely the compilation sword. There's like if you look at the actual blade, it has like the markings from the compilation, but it has like the guard of the original sword. And then there's a lot of the place where the two holes are. There's that too is from like the compilation sword. And there's some people have argued that you can actually kind of see the remnants of the gold guard underneath like the blocky thing on top. So there's a couple of people who have speculated that they might actually make the Buster Sword kind of like a sword that you can upgrade later, like that Cloud probably to make it stand out less, kind of after he gets to Midgar or whatever, that he does something with the sword, that he kind of modifies it or whatever, and to keep the memory of Zack suppressed or whatever. And then at some point in the story, when he remembers stuff, he brings out the Buster Sword again. He removes like the iron guard around it, and then it reveals like the golden guard underneath. And then you get like the Buster Sword as a kind of new, more powerful weapon towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
So
I'm kind of wondering what new weapons will look like, and that like the nail gun.
Yeah. That would be cool. That has to be there.
In there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've just been personally curious, if there's going to be any of the scenes at like the Honeybee Inn or anything like that are going to be removed. Or are they really going to go that route? Because some of that stuff makes me feel like this would almost be an M-rated game.
I think it'll be there somehow. This game is going to have good amounts of fan service, I guarantee. So they're going to have the cross-dressing scene. They're going to have those weird scenes in the sector market. I mean, I think that's going to happen. They may tone it down from like, especially the Honeybee Inn, and it may just be like an awkward Japanese anime like scene that, oh no, I got myself into a bedroom of other men, and just give those awkward anime exchanges and leave. But I think it'll be there in some form.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any other final points you guys want to make about the Final Fantasy VII Remake, or should we just transition to another Eden?
We can transition.
Okay. So another Eden. This is a game that, again, you brought to my attention, Hian, and it was kind of interesting because it's supposed to be a spiritual successor to Chrono Trigger. Now you hear that a lot. Like it seems these days, like every game's supposed to be a spiritual successor to Chrono Trigger, and most of the time it is not. But when you look at the people involved with this, you have the same individual that I believe wrote the script for the original Chrono Trigger, right, and Chrono Cross. So obviously that holds a lot more weight. It's not just a fan; it's an individual that actually had a very important role in the original game, right? And then obviously. Isunori Mitsuda is returning to do the music, or it's the game's already been out, and it's going to be coming out in English on January 28th, which I'm very excited to hear because initially when I saw the game was only Japanese, or only in Japanese, I should say, I was very, very disappointed, especially hearing from you how enjoyable the game was.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. I'm not going to pretend as if everybody enjoys it. There are people who don't enjoy it as well. But
I mean, I've been observing it for a while now. I mean, I've talked to Hian constantly about another Eden. I just hated the fact that the West just never got it until now. And I mean, I'm looking forward to it. It's the first mobile game I've been looking really forward to in a long time. The artwork looks great. The music's beautiful. I like how the characters look in the game. Like, I'm not usually for side-scrolling RPGs, but this looks like one that I'll definitely give an exception for. I mean, just everything looks too good to not get into. What I do wonder is if it's actually going to be an actual free-to-play game, or are they going to pull a Final Fantasy Dimensions 2 and just you buy it and they just cut out all the free to play stuff that's in the Japanese?
As probably I think I've said before, but there are two versions in the works, right? There's the one that's coming out for Android and smartphones, or iPhones, I mean, and then there's the other version that they're working on the port for Switch, right? And I think there is some chance that the Switch port might be like a single purchase kind of deal because I don't think Nintendo. I'm not sure if Nintendo actually allows for sort of like a gotcha type systems.
Right.
So
at the very least, it would be scaled
not
back.
in Europe. Yeah. So like another Eden, for instance, doesn't have an EU release for that very reason. It's only available in American territories, I think, and Canada and stuff like that. But that, not that it's very hard. It's very easy to get around that when it comes to the Google store. But no, it's definitely going to be free to play on the Android. And so there's that. But the game is well enough balanced that it's if you're used to like regular old school JRPGs, you're probably not going to have any problems mowing through all of the primary content. The only place that I think that you might be hitting any kind of snags, unless you've been lucky, is some of like the obscure side content. So I don't know if you remember this, but in Chrono Trigger, there's this optional boss, and what's the place called, Beyond Time, the Space and Time, or whatever, like the place where you teleport through time dimensions.
Oh, the end of time.
End of time, yeah. So obviously you get to the end of time in another Eden, and there's this little creature that looks like a Furby or whatever that kind of walks around there. You can fight him in the original Chrono Trigger too, and every time you defeat him, he gets like bigger and stronger, right? And he ends up being like massive. That's
his
one of
level,
the most
how it works is his level coincides with yours. So if your characters are level 1, he's going to be a small little level 1 creature. If you're level 99, he's going to be a gigantic level 99 creature.
Yeah.
He reflects how strong the party is.
Yeah, so like in another Eden, you have to actually still fight him like routinely to get him up to that level. But like when he gets to like the maximum level or whatever, he is I think he's several levels above the maximum level that you can actually achieve with your party. So he is insanely difficult, and so for that, you're probably going to have some kind of like S rank, like super characters or whatever. But the good news is that the game has a setup where like you earn premium currency through like just kind of progressing the story, and they give you enough pulls with a guaranteed like what is it, like a 4-star character or whatever So by the time you've completed the main story, you should have a full worthy party of like max tier characters. And so you can still get a bit unlucky depending on sort of their elemental affinities and stuff like that, and whether you got a good healer or something like that. But yeah, it should get you through most of the game without spending anything if you're just interested in the story and you're willing to grind a little bit like you do in most JRPGs anyways. So
how is the story? Is it actually?
I like the story. It is a Chrono Trigger story, and like basically, or a little bit different. It mixes two different storylines. It has like two consecutive storylines. On one hand, your main character's sister gets abducted by the ogre tribe, and you're supposed to bring her back. But then, as you're trying to do that, you get trapped in like in a time portal, and you get sent to the future. And during your escapades in the future, you manage to do something like not on purpose. You get kind of manipulated by this person, and you do something stupid, and then everything starts falling apart, and then you kind of have to fix it. And so you have kind of everything falling apart on the time scale of things, and then you have like your minor story about just kind of wanting your sister back on the other end of things, and it's pretty cool. I like the story. I don't know how well they're going to translate it, but I really enjoy the story. It's just it's very like kind of whimsical and feels very Chrono Trigger-esque in a good way, right? So it's a little nostalgia kick here and there. You find I hate that they translated to Cyrus rather than Silas, but in the original Chrono Trigger, Frog had a friend, right? And this character has Frog's friend's name, but in this timeline or in this universe, he is the Frog. So you get Frog, but it's not Frog from Chrono Trigger. It's the friend of it's the friend of Frog from Chrono Trigger who's become a frog. And then it's funny because he has a friend again who's been turned into Scarecrow, and I think it's heavily implied that the Scarecrow is actually Frog from Chrono Trigger. So he got screwed.
Well, given all the because from everything I've seen, there's a lot, and what you're talking about, there's like so many similarities with Chrono Trigger, right?
Yeah.
It just amazes me. Is this like this isn't a Square Enix project, right?
No, it isn't.
So
I don't
I'm
maybe
surprised.
they don't have like maybe they don't have like trademarks on like necessarily story components like that. I don't know how trademark laws work in Japan
Either. Yeah. Just made me wonder, given the just outright references all over the place. But that sounds awesome. One of the concerns I had was, initially whether or not they were going to port this over here was just, mobile gaming is not as big here, I guess, right, as it is in Japan, or it's not really respected as it is, I would assume, in Japan. I don't live in Japan, obviously. So correct me if I'm wrong. But I am glad this is going to come out on the Switch.
Yeah, like I feel like the game is very well optimized for touch devices, right? That's why it is like it has like the side-scrolling style, because it means that you don't have to fidget with anything, right? You can just touch anywhere on the screen, just pull, and your character runs, right? And like the world exists on like multiple planes upwards as well. So once you get to like a junction, you just kind of swipe upwards and you move like up on the plane or down on the plane, right? But it has a really, really big world that you get to explore. So it's not like one of these games where you have like a menu and then you touch. This is what I can't stand with like most mobile games. They're so lazy. It's just like you have a menu, you press the next mission, you go there, you fight 3 encounters, and you're dumped back in the menu, and there's like no sense of cohesion or world or whatever, right? But here, yeah,
I was going to ask that. I was like, oh man, there could be like all these Final Fantasy free to plays where you pick something, you battle, get a story cutscene once in a while, and back.
So here you actually have to run around, and there are proper towns and cities with shops and inns and side quests with characters that you talk to and stuff like that you have to move through. And you can literally run without a single loading screen. You can run from one end of like the world to the other end of the world, like in a single go if you want to, right? Because there's like a no loading, like smooth transition between dungeons and towns. You just kind of run and then you're in the town. It's really nice. The art flows well and it just feels good. The place where I think some people might immediately not like totally feel it is that the combat system is quite simplistic. So, well, it is what it is, right? It's a very simple combat system. It's every character has attack, and then they have 4 commands each that you unlock new abilities as you go along, but you can only have 4 different moves for each character, and you have 6 character in your party. You have like 4 on your front row that battles, and then you can do the Final Fantasy X thing where you exchange one of the characters for the other. So and there's no items. So basically how strategy works in this game is that you have to like carefully remove one character out of battle and replace them and let them kind of heal on the back row, or to get their MP back if you start running out of MP. So it's a balancing act of like knowing what character to use to get like full potential, like in terms of elemental affinities and stuff like that. And if you get poisoned, right, got to move them to the back row and then change them in with somebody else, and so they get a little rest, get their MP back. And so it actually gets quite strategic at some bosses, but generally it's a very simple and straightforward thing. And then you have like your special attack, which is called Another Force. I think there's like a special bar that builds when you do damage, and when you tap it when it's full, you get like this infinity combo thing going on where whilst the meter like drains, you can just do like an infinite amount of like attacks, just like tap like crazy and just do all your best attacks for a period of time. And if you have characters who are of the same class, like say you have Frog, who's a samurai, and then another character that's a samurai, they will do like a dual technique in like, you know, in old school Chrono Trigger fashion. So
very, very cool.
Yeah,
well,
that's cool to me.
I mean, usually with mobile titles, I'm not really that interested because a lot of times I just feel like they're cash grabs, but this definitely does not look like it's the case. Looks like a lot of care was put into the game. A lot of love was put in the game, and I definitely think this is worth picking up, even if it is coming out on your mobile phone first. But I mean, they are doing a Switch version too, so that's really exciting.
The way it sounds like to me, it sounds like they didn't want to make a free-to-play game RPG, and they're like, okay, how can we make this like a traditional RPG as much as possible without the free-to-play elements compromising it too much? It's like, okay, well, let's put it more around the side quest type of deal where you may feel more enticed to purchase something, because probably the company they presented it to, it's like, okay, well, you got to make it free to play and yada yada. And
yeah, it's not one of those games that's it doesn't bother you. Like you open the menu and you start the game, there are no pop-ups of like buy this, do this, blah blah blah. It's just a straight like clean like screen, no interface. You tap it, open the menu, right? There's just this regular RPG enemy like menu, no crap. And then in the
you don't have to stick your credit card number in to play a new game.
So like the gacha feature is like in a sort of sub menu kind of thing. And as I said, like you get a pretty decent amount of crystals just playing the game that will allow you to get at least a fair share of characters. So I don't see. You also have characters that you recruit through the story. Most of these characters can be leveled up. You have something called Another Dungeon, which is like once you've cleared a dungeon, you you unlock the ability to kind of redo it in from like your time travel place, and that's a place where you can get a bunch of rare items and extra experience and all kinds of crazy stuff. And if you do those, you will get a special kind of item that allows you to class upgrade your character. So even if your character is not necessarily like a highest tier character, you can go and do the Another Dungeon a couple of times, get the items that you need, and then class upgrade them so they become stronger. So you're not like necessarily stuck with a bad team, even if you didn't get a good pull.
That's probably what I do is try to level up the main character as much as I can, just for narrative purposes, keeping the main group intact and not the side stuff. Maybe I'll pull one in if I need to win a battle, but
Yeah, and like there's a lot of like I don't know how much of the content is going to be available once the global version launches, but like now the Japanese version has, there's a fishing mini game, there's all kinds of stuff. They've kind of built and expanded it a lot, so there's just tons of story content and like mini games and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Was
So
there was it a full game when it first came out? The main story.
yeah, the main story is full, but the main story has expanded beyond like it's the conclusion of like the time arc, I think, because the ogre that kidnaps your sister, like that you conclude that story arc, but that introduces you basically to a new ogre story arc where you learn sort of the secrets of I think the sword that Aldo, the main character, has, because he has like the special sword, this crazy sword that is like crazy. And the story of that blade is not introduced to you in like the main narratives. That kind of stuff comes later. So those are they've it's just so much extra story content. Like if you watch like there's a complete trailer with all the different trailers for the different story arcs, and that I think that trailer is 25 minutes long.
Oh man.
And yeah, it's just there's so much. So it's basically now in terms of story content, it's more like two and maybe 1.5 game or maybe 2 games in one.
Oh wow.
So,
Interesting. Well, I'm definitely gonna pick it up for sure. The only unfortunate thing is apparently it's coming out here on the 28th, and we have Kingdom Hearts 3 coming out the next day. So it might get a little overshadowed, unfortunately.
That's
well, I can't be home all the time, so it'll be nice when I'm on the go.
That's true.
Nice.
That's a very good point. We do have a couple of comments from last week. We usually kind of touch on those real quick. Do you have a couple of minutes?
For sure.
All right.
Just gonna send a message.
No worries.
Let's go ahead.
Okay, so first one from Ozzymus, or we know him as Joker. He said Final Fantasy 12 and Final Fantasy 10 would make for great portables. I feel as if half the people who buy the Switch barely use the dock. Also, here's secretly hoping that Hat gets addicted to Vesperia so much that he finds it difficult to jump on Kingdom Hearts 3. Vesperia is great. I'm really enjoying it. I'm going to keep playing it. I might just play both those games at the same time. Now I also have another Eden to play as well, but it's okay. That's a good problem to have. BioPhoenix, he says, so many people miss the point of the Nintendo article. Then again, there's so many people that doom and gloom about Nintendo when they do anything that is odd since the N64 came out, and well, they're still here, obviously. Did you see that article last week about everyone took out of context with Nintendo? Everyone thought Nintendo was not going to make any more consoles. Yeah, you didn't see that? Okay, yeah, it was dumb. They just were like saying like, well, we're going to be flexible, adaptable to whatever changes. We've been around before consoles. We'll be here long after consoles, even if consoles are no longer selling. We're still going to be making games, whatever that new market is. And everyone took that as, well, Mario is going to be on the PlayStation 5. Like.
I'll finally get Donkey Kong on Xbox.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah. Exactly. Let's see here. We have from Leanne. She's saying, "I just want Nintendo to get rid of the bezel. The Switch would look so much sleeker with a Switch update." I can agree with that. And then Daniel Scott, he says, "Are you guys looking forward to Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen on Switch?" He's planning to pick it up and do a playthrough. He's asking us if we're going to do that. We did talk about it a little bit towards the end. I don't know if we'll do a playthrough like discussion, but I don't know. We kind of talked about that last week. It seems like it's a good game. Gameplay's good, so I don't know. Hian, have you ever played that game, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen?
I have. I'm a fan, so great to have it on the Switch. Means I'm definitely gonna force my office to pay for that.
Hey man, it's an office expense for your happipiness. It makes sense to me.
It's very important.
Yeah, not every day you can say I want to make Dragon's Dogma a tax write-off.
Just tell them I approve. I don't know if that's anything.
Yeah. It will definitely improve my workflow.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, listen, we really appreciate you being here and giving us your insight on Final Fantasy VII. It was a really good time talking about that, and then Another Eden as well. And we just really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
No problem, man.
Thanks for coming on.
And I just want to make a quick little additional tidbit here. Next week, I've already pre-ordered Kingdom Hearts, so I'm going to try to be playing it. I'm going to get it at 9 p.m. the night before.
Same.
So I'm planning on streaming it, but I don't know how long I'm going to be in that line, and I do got to work the next day. But keep out for that. Look out for that on I think it's a Monday, I believe, right?
Yeah,
I don't know. I gotta look at the calendar.
Yeah, it's a Monday. At least here in Japan, it is. I don't know if that changes.
No, it's still Monday. So
still Monday. That's good.
Yeah, nothing hasn't changed that much. So, but anyways, so I'll be streaming that hopefully, and you guys can check it out if you haven't picked it up. But regardless, next week obviously we're going to be talking about excitement with Kingdom Hearts 3. So that podcast will come out before the game comes out. So just kind of give us your thoughts on whether this is going to be.
I sprinkle a little Resident Evil 2 on there because that comes out.
Sure, for sure. I'm more excited for that, so I'm with you on that. Well,
Well, it's going to be a busy time. We got Resident Evil 2, we got Kingdom Hearts 3. We're going to get to finally play Another Eden. I got Tales of Vesperia to play. It's busy. It's I don't know if I have enough time between my job and other stuff, but I'll manage. But I really appreciate everyone checking this check us out again. Hian, thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you all next week. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, for sure. Take care.